Back in Tennessee, my wife and I served in a church called Unity of the Cumberlands in Cookeville, Tennessee. They pronounced it Cookville. But I remember one Christmas season being at a holiday party, and people were mingling about. There was probably 25, 30 people there. A gentleman came up to me and he said, "What do you do for a living?" And I said, I'm a minister. And he said, "Oh, what denomination?" And I said, "Unity." And he said, "Is that like," and he kind of, his body language kind of, he said, "Is that like Unitarian Universalist?" And I said, "No, it's distinct from that. It was born out of two people's experience, two people's great need for healing. And they heard a lecture by a man out of Chicago way back in 1886. And that word was possibility for wholeness. And they took those principles that they heard that night on wholeness, and they practiced them and practiced them and practiced them. And they received complete healing, not only physically, but through self-realization of realizing what they actually were. Children of God. That they had a divine inheritance of the Spirit, and they claimed it and named it and owned it, and they allowed it and accepted it, and it moved through their lives. And they were not only healed themselves, but they were moved to begin a spiritual educational movement in consciousness that survives and thrives to this day. Hundreds of Unity congregations all over North America. I've been proud to be a part of that, because Unity is not a theology or a denomination. It is a spiritual educational movement in consciousness, and that is what is the healing, through allowing these truth principles which are based upon spiritual law. Thursday morning I was sitting in meditation and the words came to me: spiritual law, focus on spiritual law. And we have these laws, these dynamic laws of forgiveness and healing and prosperity. But there is one singular law that is underneath those laws, and that is the law of love and oneness. That when we practice the law of love and oneness, we align ourselves with the divine flow of healing, of prosperity, and forgiveness of self and others. And in that healing, we are free. In the Unity tradition, which is Christ-based, the focus is on entering into that divine flow, aligning ourselves with that one law of love and oneness. And when we do, that which seems to be our travail, our challenge, is transformed through the renewal of our minds and the opening of our hearts. The Christ, that word is a Greek word. And I often say to people, because that word was not used at the time that Jesus was alive. It came later with a man named Paul who had been transformed through the renewal of his mind in a town called Antioch. And a soldier reportedly said to Paul, "Oh, you Christians, you." It was a derogatory term. You troublemakers. You're upsetting the Pax Romana, the Roman peace. Well, that needed to be upset for a greater good, a greater freedom. So there is a distinction that I want to make today between Christ and Jesus. Some people get triggered when I use these words, especially Jesus. Reportedly 6-8 months ago, there was a man in the lower level after the service that I had been talking about Jesus, and he came up to a board member and said, red-faced with anger, that minister used that word Jesus 14 times in the service, and I'm not coming back. And he left. It's a trigger for people. Can be for greater good or for challenge. But it is my function as a healer, and I am that, a healer of consciousness, a healer of soul. It's interesting. Sometimes I talk about this content, and my whole body inside starts to change, starts to vibrate on a different level. And that's what Christ is. It's a vibration. It is a power. It is a frequency that is primordial. It is eternal. It has always been. It animates the whole of the creation. Jesus was the first that we know of that allowed that to completely animate his life. And he walked and healed and loved with such a depth and such a power that it was an imprint into the psyche of the collective of the whole of humanity. And it still excites people today. And those that are triggered by this topic, I can have great compassion for, because in their upbringing, these words, Jesus and Christ, were used hand in hand, perhaps with making them feel bad about themselves. Therein lies the healing. Therein lies the shift that is possible through the conversation and the reality. It's interesting that according to the Center for the Study of Global Christianity at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, in the year 2000, there were reportedly 34,000 different denominations of Christianity. That was in the year 2000. And in the year 2012, reportedly 43,000. Here we are in 2019, and there's perhaps maybe 50,000. Different ways of looking at this one life And perhaps that's a good thing. People are free to think, free to expand and go with what it is that they feel in their hearts about this, an amazing movement in consciousness. Because Christianity was never called that in the early years. It was just simply called the way of life, the way of being, the way of aligning ourselves with a greater truth. So unity itself, this teaching, has never really been wanting to be a denomination. It's just a spiritual educational movement. And the common denominator is the light of God within us, each of us. So we don't have a doctrine of theology. Yay. Yeah. Theology just simply means a study of God. This isn't about a study of God. This is about allowing God's Spirit to flourish and to blossom into our whole being so that we become free and untethered by the world's vibrations of lack, limitation, fear, shame, and guilt. We walk our lives in full realization of the light within. And one thing that I just continue to want to bring home is that this presence and power is immediately available to us in this room right now. The intellect would deny this. And I affirm at times that the only place that the omnipresence of God is not is in our doubt. So the work at hand is simply to transform the intellect and allow that which is true to be through us, to be what we are created to be, always have and always will be. And it is a universalist message. There's a man that you may be aware of. His name's Adyashanti. Very big in the United States. I don't know about in Canada. I'm not sure. American spiritual teacher whose main focus is Buddhism. But he's a universalist also. He integrates all the teachings in a wonderful way. And he said this, and he wrote a book called Resurrecting Jesus. He said, Jesus symbolizes the spiritual mystery of each one of us and points us towards the radiance within that is available right now. The radiance that is within us that is available right now. The story of Jesus, as he continues, has not waned in its power to change lives. Yet today, even though the majority of us grew up in a culture suffused by the mythos of Jesus, many of us feel disconnected from the essence and vitality of his teachings. That's interesting, is it not? Adyashanti also said, when the eternal and the human meet, that's where love is born. When the eternal and the human meet, that's where love is born. If I could name anything within the unity teachings, which I feel are part of a universal power of truth, part of, a link in the chain of the great educational movement established by Jesus the Christ, I would say that this is the core of the teachings, where the eternal and the human meet. And that is all about the law of love and oneness, that the law of love and oneness shows up right here in the core of our being. That when we are in fear or when we are in doubt, all we need do is drop down into the center of the core of being, our heart center, and guess what? The doubts go away. How would that be? It's simply because we allow ourselves to move into the truth of self. Charles Fillmore, who was the co-founder of the Unity Movement, he said, "We should clearly understand that the Christ, the spiritual man, spoke often through Jesus, the natural man. And then again, the natural man, Jesus, spoke of his own account." So what does that mean for us? How is that intimately connected with our experience? That the Christ can speak through you. Sometimes we speak of our own account. And then other times, when we feel that alignment and that power with the truth of being, that which is called the Christ within, that which is our immortal nature, when we allow that to be accessed and we live from that place, that is when the magic happens. That is when there are healings. That is when there are breakthroughs in relationships and healing in body and prosperity, and we're filled with divine ideas as to what it is that we're about. Deepak Chopra also writes about Jesus in his writings because he recognizes that this is a universal truth. And I'm not standing up here to honk my horn for Jesus. I'm not. You have the freedom to live your life in accord with what draws you to your truth. But there's something else that's going on here. In his book, The Third Jesus, Deepak Chopra says, first there is the historical Jesus, the man who lived more than 2,000 years ago and whose teachings are the foundation of Christian theology and thought. Next, there is the Jesus, the Son of God, who has come to embody an institutional religion with specific dogma, a priesthood, and devout believers. And finally, there is the third Jesus, the cosmic Christ, the spiritual guide whose teachings embraces all of humanity, not just the church built in his name. He speaks to the individual who wants to find God as a personal experience, to attain what some might call grace or God consciousness or enlightenment. So I don't know where you are on your walk with Jesus. Maybe you left him behind a long time ago because of your own stuff that you experienced along the way that wasn't pleasant. Maybe you walk with Buddha now, or any other spiritual teacher that is in alignment with your own perception of truth. But we're all in a choice point, I feel, on the earth right now. We're at a choice point. The message of the Christ teachings is to accept the light within. The light within. When we accept the light within, then we're strong, we're grounded, we're whole, and we live our lives in accord with the spiritual law of love and oneness. Deepak Chopra also says the cosmic Christ, is right here and right now in the immediacy of our lives. How many people in this room, when you give your attention to this presence and power, feel a quickening within your own being? Anybody here? A lot of people. That's the immediacy of its power. Okay. That was a nice little jingle that just brought that home. No accidents in God. Do we realize that there's no accidents in God? That I had a friend that used to say there's not an atom out of place in the universe. Not an atom out of place. So you're sitting in this room right now. You're listening to what I'm saying, or not, because of the content around Jesus. Fair enough. You can check out. But there is a power and a presence within the cosmic Christ essence that is more real than any of our resistance or belief system about not embracing the Christ truth within. Jesus doesn't need our worship. What I feel in my heart of hearts around these teachings and around him is that he's a friend. He's a teacher. He's a powerful way shower into an alignment with the law of love and oneness. I want to close with a quote from Viktor Frankl, who lived in concentration camps in Germany and survived while so many people around him died. He said, everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. So whether or not you accept Jesus is none of my business. But what is my business is your freedom. Your freedom from bondage, from pain and suffering, of guilt and shame and fear. That is my business. Not in an intrusive way, but a supportive way. To be an advocate for you in your life. That's the message of the Christ teachings. Amen.